everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff,
Yes, sir.
do you remember Leave It to Beaver?
Well, only in syndication. I'm not quite old enough to have seen its original airing, but yes, I'm
Yeah.
familiar with the show.
Um, there was it was Beaver Cleaver. Beaver was his nickname. Was a kid with an older brother, parents, in a typical
Wally, his older brother
Wally,
Wally.
his older brother
He whiz
Wally.
Wally.
Hmm?
He whiz
And
Wally.
it was he got into shenanigans, right? Like with
Yes.
his friend Lumpy Rutherford. But
Right.
one of his older brother's friends was um, Eddie Haskell, played brilliantly by the actor Ken Osmond, who passed away a few years ago, who left acting and went on to become a police officer, interestingly.
Hmm.
Um, but there's something in psychology called the Eddie Haskell effect, because Eddie Haskell was always very nice to Mr. and Mrs. Cleaver. Oh, you're
Oh yeah.
looking so lovely today, Mrs. Cleaver. Oh, what a nice tie, Mr. Cleaver. But he was an absolute bully to everybody else when the parents were not around.
Well, and I don't remember him being so much as a bully as a con artist. He was a sneaky, lying,
Manipulative.
manipulative, self-serving little
Yes.
bastard.
Yes. But he was also um abusive. Not physically abusive, but
He was
verbally
mean.
abusive. He was
Yeah,
mean.
he
He
was
was mean
mean.
and belittling uh, Beaver and Lumpy and others. And so this has become known as the Eddie Haskell effect. And it relates because today we're going to be talking about bullying.
And bullies.
And just a side note, Barbara Billingsley, who played
Yes.
June
You-
Cleaver, the
Yep.
mother. I knew a guy in college who went to um, he went to Hollywood High School or Los LA High. I forget the name of the high school, but he lived not far from Barbara Billingsley, and he
Hmm.
said that in real life she was just as nice and sweet and warm-hearted as the character she played. And I thought that
Nice.
was, I always remember that because I thought that was a really nice thing to say. But before we get into the topic of bullying, how are
Yes.
you fortifying yourself for the evening's discussion?
Well, I wandered to my liquor cabinet and I found it to be somewhat understocked. And
Horrors,
I
horrors.
know, yes, unbeknownst to me, it's the supply has been dwindling, and uh, so I just quickly whipped up a
Don't you have people for that?
well, I I rather expected my wife to keep an eye on it, and I don't know
No,
what
no, no,
exactly
no,
has
no,
happened.
no. Well,
Um, but uh, I poured a little bit of a praline pecan liqueur, a ginger spiced whiskey, and a little bit of my go-to Fever Tree ginger ale, and a little bit of aromatic bitters, and it's okay.
and what do you call this okay
I,
concoction?
I emergency services.
Emergency. Very good. Very good.
And you, sir, what's your concoction? Or oh, you know, that's something of a concoction, I take it.
Yes. This is a Jack Rose. A
Huh.
Jack Rose dates from the early 20th century in a very well-known 1948 cocktail book. It was listed as one of the six standard cocktails.
Oh,
Um, this is the second one I've made. Not this evening. I made one earlier. The first one I made was with apple brandy,
hmm.
which is the
Okay.
original recipe was Applejack, which is different than apple brandy. Applejack is a naturally fermented, i.e., jacked apple cider.
Okay.
Um, Apple brandy is fermented apples with neutral spirits. So the first one I
Right.
made was apple brandy, which is aged, lemon juice, and grenadine. And it was
Hmm.
good. It was very aptly, very, really punchy. This one, seeing another recipe, I made with Calvados, which is an unoaked French apple brandy, lime
Oh,
juice,
you mean
unoaked.
it's not aged in barrels then? It's aged
I
in
not aged in barrels,
okay.
at least according to the descriptions I read. Um, and lime juice instead of lemon juice and grenadine. And it's different.
Okay.
It's more subtle. Unfortunately, I didn't have fresh lime juice, and I think that
Oh,
negatively
quel
affected.
dommage.
Uh, well, there's a little bit of the kind of not quite bitter, not quite metallic taste you get with um, bottled
Reconstituted
bottled
juice.
lime juice. Um, but I'm undecided as to which I like. I think they should be like they're almost like two different cocktails, very closely related. But
Hmm. Okay.
Jack Rose. So
Well, it's a lovely color.
yeah, it's refreshing. I thought you should try it sometime.
All right.
Um, so bullying.
Yes.
Um, it's interesting as we were looking looking up information about this. The um um stopbullying.gov, which is an official government resource about bullying, focuses on school children, bullying in school children. And I certainly encountered that when I was in elementary school.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas the American Psychological Association has resources about school children bullying in school, but that's not in their definition of it. They say bullying is a form of aggressive behavior in which someone intentionally, repeatedly causes another person injury or discomfort. Bullying can take the form of physical contact, words, or more subtle actions. The bullied individual typically has trouble defending him or herself and does nothing to cause the bullying. And
Okay.
so um, I think we've certainly seen depictions of bullying and responses to it in movies. My
Oh, like
Bodyguard, yeah,
every single teen movie has
yes.
some bullying element.
I
Harry
think of
Potter.
Harry Potter, My Bodyguard from 1980, which has a satisfying ending because the bad guys get beat up, which is pretty typical. Um,
The
the Karate Kid even has
Karate Kid.
bullying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's typical, a typical trope in movies because they're always the hero overcomes an adversity or an adversary, right?
Right.
Um, and I had experience with bullying when I was in elementary school. A kid was bothering me, and it escalated to the point where we had a fight in the playground after school.
Ooh.
A very ineffective fight with all the kids watching, and teachers broke it up. And I went home and I told my parents about it, and they said, "We've always taught you to talk to people, but if you have to fight, you're going to win." And they took me to a dojo, and that was really it was about a year later when the same kid jumped me in gym class, and I threw him to the ground and got him in a headlock and rubbed his face in the dirt, and he never bothered me again. So that was
That is
my
unfortunately sometimes what it takes.
yes. And in many movies, you see, oh, and then they become best friends. I wasn't going to become best friends with this asshole. He was a jerk. And I found out later nobody really liked him. He just picked on me because he thought he could.
Right.
Um, so
Well, that's another sort of aspect of bullying, right? Is
yes,
the bully feels like they can get away with it.
exactly. And often the using the Eddie Haskell techniques of hiding what they do. So, um, so tell me, what do you think?
Yes. What do I think about bullies? I'm
Yes,
against them
I am
in
too. I
general.
despise them.
And as we are talking about, as we try to do, is to um, view these against or through the virtues. Bullying is the antithesis, sort of being chivalric
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
many ways. It
Shield of the
requires
weak. Shield of the
the
weak.
old of the
Not,
weak. That's the
yeah,
oath we take, yes, in our
yes,
organization. And in amongst our virtues, it's certain bullying is not a function of courage; it is a function of cowardice.
yes.
Um, uh, yeah. So yeah, and this came from an article that I saw earlier. It was passed on by somebody else, and I don't remember who it was, but David Gerald, who I follow, um, author,
Author, The Trouble with
pundit,
Tribbles.
trouble. Yeah, right. Yeah, the first thing I ever read by him that I remembered was a very interesting book to me as a teenager called The Man Who Folded Himself.
Yes.
Kind of a novella, I think,
Mhm.
somewhere lengthwise between a novella and a novel, but
Yeah.
had made a very big impression on me as a, I don't know, adolescent, about time travel and um, it dealt a lot with looking at yourself,
Yeah.
right? Because the character gets a machine that allows him to travel in time, and he meets himself at different stages of his life. And so, anyway, so but he talked about bullying, particularly in a political arena, um, and I don't want to get too into that, but the the idea that bullies, like we were just saying, that occasionally it can't end until the bully is put in their place, so to speak.
Yes.
They have to be shown that one has to show a bully that you cannot be bullied
Yes.
anymore.
And it often has to come from the persons group that are being bullied to show that they
Yes.
cannot be bullied. It if for somebody else to intervene, like an authority, like a teacher breaking up a schoolyard fight, doesn't necessarily work.
Right.
Um,
And can often just bring greater retaliation.
yes. I was reminded of something, having been researching and writing about comedy and the history of a comedy show for the past several years. Um, Punching up rather than punching down is a principle in comedy. If you make jokes about people in authority, up, punching up,
Hmm.
generally the crowd is with you. But if you make jokes about people who are powerless, make jokes about people
Yes.
with power, it's acceptable. Make jokes about people who are powerless, it's not, because it's like bullying, and bullying is punching down.
Yeah.
Um, I think that bullying, you mentioned politics, and without getting into it too deeply, I think in politics and in business, bullying, there's in office bullying that
Yeah.
can certainly happen. Bad bosses and coworkers and all kinds of stuff like that. Um, but I think bullying can rise to the level of extortion. I mean, at its ultimate, it's kind of a blackmail and extortion are a form of bullying. Um, an aggressive behavior causing another person discomfort,
Right.
injury,
Hmm.
um, and I think that governments can, with power, can try to bully organizations, people, and even other governments. We'll
Yes.
give you
True.
we'll give you aid if you give us all your mineral rights. To use
Yeah.
just an example out of,
Yeah.
the
Just,
top of my
yeah, a
head,
crazy,
Yeah.
unrealistic example just pulled out of thin air. Yeah, I get it.
Nice country you got there. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. The
Right.
the whole all the depictions of the mob, organized crime, are really organized bullying in a way, extortion. Nice
Oh, yeah.
business you got here. We're here to protect it. Who are you protecting it from? We're protecting it from us. So give us money.
Well, yeah, there's an
Bullying.
implication. Well, I mean, it's usually presented, right, as well, there's a bad element in this neighborhood. You wouldn't want them
Yes.
to come in and, take advantage of you. So we'll help you out. But of course, that costs a little bit.
Yeah.
And of course, as soon as the payment doesn't come, guess who the bad
The bad
element turns
element
out to
is
be? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So, um, I think that how does one how does one combat the bully? And there's a cartoon I've seen of um like a big fish chasing a small fish.
Right.
And then the next panel is a huge group of small fish, bigger than
Giant
the big
school
fish,
of small. Yeah.
chasing the big fish. And I think, and we've talked before about community, and I think that's really uh, people are stronger in community. They're also
Well,
sometimes
using
stupider in groups, but
well, using your schoolyard movie analogy, I find in general there are two ways that the bullying is resolved. One most common, I think, is probably the bullied, the victim, right, finds a way, gets training,
mm,
secretly works out or gets, lessons from a master who works in a soup kitchen,
wax on, wax off.
wax on, wax
And the
off.
training montage.
Right, the
There's
training
always the
montage.
training montage.
Right,
Da
right,
da
right.
da da da
Well,
da.
often it's not just a montage. Often it is the whole movie. It's
Yeah,
about the growth of
the path.
the
Yeah,
kid, right? So, but then so they stand up to the bully and they take him down and decisively. And of course, they're surrounded by their schoolmates, right? So
hmm
they take down the bully and everybody cheers and everybody pats them on the back, the hero. And now they're the hero and they are carried off on the shoulders of their compatriots who thanking him for freeing them from the bully.
right.
The other way, and I find more satisfying, is the bully or the victim is still being bullied and he stands up and he gets knocked down and he stands up again and he gets knocked down until somebody in the crowd steps forward and says, "Hey, leave him alone."
Yeah,
And he says, "Oh, I'll fight you." Or he knocks that person down too. Then somebody else steps out of the crowd. It says, "Stop it."
I am Spartacus. I am Spartacus.
Right.
Yeah,
And eventually it's not the victim standing up and beating the villain at his own game.
yeah,
It's the crowd, it's the community that comes forward and says, "We will not allow this
yeah.
anymore. We will stand against you." And I find that to be a lot more satisfying as a response to bullies. But
Yes,
that's a hard thing, and that's not something an individual can do. You have to decide as a community to not be bullied, and it's difficult.
I think it.
But it
I think
often
it.
takes just one or two
Yeah,
people.
I was just going to say it takes one person to stand up, and then hopefully it takes then a second person. And I know you and I have been in meetings where each we have each individually been the one to say, no, wait a minute, stop, no.
Right.
And other people will go, oh, yeah, yeah, I agree. It's like, okay, why didn't you say something first? Why weren't you the one to say something first? Um, I
Well,
think,
and I don't want to blame anybody if they
yeah,
don't
yeah,
feel that it was their place to speak and they waited for somebody else.
Or they
It's
didn't know how to do it. I know
sure,
the support, at least the support is there after the fact, after the initial effort.
right.
But I think you're right because going back to the American Psychological Association, they say the bullied individual typically has trouble defending him or herself and does nothing to cause the bullying. That's the somebody being bullied can't necessarily, they don't have the time, the means, the physical ability, the mental ability to get the training
Right.
to go Rambo on this guy, right?
Right.
And it's not even necessarily a guy, there's the movie Mean Girls, for example.
Yeah, right. Sure.
um, or The Craft. You
Oh
remember that
yeah.
movie? And yeah, there's yeah. Um,
There are hundreds of
well,
movies where
yeah,
bullying is the antagonist is a bully.
yes. Um, what was the Thor Thor movie with um the Emperor? Jeff Goldblum is the Emperor,
Oh, he's not an emperor.
or
He's
whatever the hell he is, but
yeah.
he's a bully. He's, making
Oh
people
yeah.
his bidding. And at the end, he tries to turn his defeat into, see, you all did so great. And as the crowd is approaching him. So
Yeah. I gave you this. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
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 Um, so I think one of the difficult things is for someone who's being bullied to ask for help.
Well, yes, you're in a psychological position where you already feel weak,
Mhm.
where you're made to feel powerless. And that's part of the bully's tactic, right? Is to make you feel, particularly like a psychological bully, um, an abusive relationship can include things like nobody will believe you, and you know, I've got a reputation, that nobody's going to believe that I could do this,
Right.
and um, and even more worse, almost more insidious is you're not worth anything. Nobody is going to bother to help you, and that's the worst,
Yeah.
right? I mean, where part of you're not just trying to make them behave in a particular way by physical intimidation or financial extortion or whatever,
Mm.
but you actually are going to the trouble of making them feel so bad about themselves that they don't feel they have a right to fight back or defend
Yeah.
themselves.
Um,
So, I mean, that's it's
yeah.
it's evil. It's evil.
Yes. And I think you're right that it's cowardice. I think bullies often present themselves as strong and nothing bothers them, but but typically it's well, as we've said before, arrogance is often um, a lack of confidence in disguise.
Right. Yeah,
And
it's a cover for
right.
insecurity.
And bullying it also is. It's cowardice in disguise. And
Well, I think there's a phenomenon of that, and I don't know, I've not looked this up from a psychologist standpoint, but I could easily see, or and I may have heard somewhere, that often bullies have been bullied, and
that's probably true.
therefore,
Yeah.
yeah, therefore see see it as a way to gather or sort of preemptively defend themselves. They're they set themselves up in a power position or try to so that
Yes.
they're safer.
Someone once is an article I read about childhood. One of the things in childhood that kids do is find their source of power. And sometimes that's their role. Are they the popular kid, the jock, the smart kid, the
Hmm.
what are they? What is their ba power base? What's their
Well, it also
where
defines their community too.
right, it does. And you'll see that in school and lunchrooms where the kids hanging out in various
Yeah,
communities.
I think movies tend to exaggerate that cliquishness. There certainly exists in schools, but I think
Yeah.
it's exaggerated. But go ahead, go
I
on.
I saw some of that, certainly.
Well, I mean, you saw some of it, but I mean, maybe because I went to a smaller, relatively smaller school, you didn't, there weren't enough kids to go around to completely fill out all the cliques. And
Well,
so
how
you had
big
people doing double duty, right?
did you go to a four-year high school?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It was
I
a
did too.
Class
What
C school.
class C? I don't
Well, there's a class, I don't know how,
this size. What was
yeah,
your graduating class?
about 100 and, well, I know it exactly. It was 112.
Oh, mine was close to 2000.
Your graduating class
Yeah.
in one school?
Yes.
So you had
I
8,000
think,
kids in one
well,
school?
no, wait a second.
Your student body was probably 2,000,
Yeah, graduating class, I'm sorry, was close to,
four or 500.
no, it was about, yeah, four or five. Yeah, I think so. I think that's right.
Yeah, a
Sorry.
quarter of the school, right?
Misremembering. Yeah.
No, that's, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think it was
my
2,200 in the school. And there at that time were six high schools in
right.
my city.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I went to a rural, relatively
yeah,
rural school, so that's what a Class C, you went to a Class A school.
yeah,
And yeah, I had the entire student body of my high school was 450 kids.
yeah, that was less than my graduating class. So,
Right. But so you saw jocks were often the
yeah,
stoners too. You know, they had to do that dual duty. And band kids.
there weren't so many stoners in back in
Oh,
my
well.
day. But
And you had some jocks were also brains and
well, there's
occasionally,
certainly some, I'll call it intersectionality. There were
yeah,
the jocks who actually did theater, and there were the music students who were smart, and there was a huge overlap between music students and smart kids.
yeah,
Um, so band nerds and smart nerds. So yeah, there were, but you saw it, you
yeah,
saw,
sure.
and then there was like sometimes I would sit and eat lunch and read the dictionary.
You're like your own tower of nerddom over there.
I was, I was, it's true. Um,
And I tended to
but I
get
looked for the
along.
dirty words. So
Well, okay. Looking for pictures of reproductive systems. And I kind of moved easily between these sort of jocks and brains and nerds, science
mhm.
fiction nerds. And that was, shared fairly equally in those communities, I guess.
It was in high school. I graduated high school before D&D was invented. So
Right. Yeah.
there were no D&D nerds, but there probably certainly are now, particularly with the increased popularity of it. So,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad to see it, frankly.
oh yeah, too. Me too. I enjoyed playing when you were running campaigns, and I'm in a campaign now I'm really enjoying. I find one of the things I really enjoy is I think of it more as group storytelling, collaborative
Sure.
storytelling.
If it's a
And
well-run game, I think that's
yeah,
exactly what it is.
and the backstory and into that each of the players have written brilliant stuff, and the DM has found a way to put it all together. It's just magnificent. So
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's always been kind of, even now, still is underrated as a creative outlet for people who play.
yeah, I think more people are understanding it. I even saw a comedian post clips of his D&D specific. He asked people who plays D&D in the audience, and then he can go off and tell all his D&D
Oh, nice. Okay.
comedy, which I thought was funny. So, um, I I did. It seems like an odd thing, but I'll bring it back in. Um, I played in a campaign once many years ago, where the one of the players was a bully. I think they were they did things to satisfy themselves at the expense of the group.
Oh, yeah. I've encountered
Yes.
that too.
And that's a form, I think that's a form of you are holding the whole group hostage to your
I,
win.
it's certainly a narcissistic
Yes. Yeah.
thing, and those two often go hand in hand, I think.
Yeah. And narcissism is often a cover for a lack of confidence, bullying for cowardice, um, as we arrogance for a lack of confidence, and so yeah, absolutely. Um, I think that what I would encourage people to do is find a supportive community. I do agree. I like the as satisfying as it is viscerally,
Yeah.
personally, to see the formerly bullied kid beat the crap out of the bully. And I think
That is
that
the cycle of violence
yes, but
completing itself.
but as long as the the formerly bullied victor does not then turn around and become a bully, because
Right.
that is the problem. And
Yep.
um that's a problem. And um there's a young man in the dojo who has told the story many times of how when he was a kid studying in the dojo, he hit another kid for no reason. And his mother made him tell the Sifu at the dojo, who asked him, how he hit him, because he wanted to make sure he was using the right technique. But he made then the kid at the next class stand in horse stance. Horse stance is,
Yeah, I know what it is, but yeah.
yeah, your hands are out, your legs are bent, and it's a kind of a semi squat. You're not squatting all the way down. And holding it's difficult to hold for a long time.
Right.
And he gave a line. He said, you could not raise your head above this line for the whole hour of the class.
Wow.
And, and
But
that
he walked
was,
home funny.
yeah, but that was his lesson in humility. And the kid has grown up and turned into a fine young man. Um, but it's the teacher did what was necessary to make sure that the kid who had been bullied was not going to then become a bully. And um, but I think the community that you describe, where other people stand up for the one who's being bullied, I think that I agree. That is absolutely the best. Um, when I was in junior high, it was eighth grade, it was in gym class, and there were a couple of tall, athletic jocks. I mean, they looked like adults to us.
Right. Yeah, sure.
And one of
They were
them,
probably left back a grade or two.
I think it was likely, one of them challenged the gym teacher to wrestle.
Oh,
The gym teacher put him on his ass
I'm
repeatedly.
sure. You got that old man strength. You don't know, kid.
What's that?
You got that old man strength. You don't
Yeah,
know, kid.
yeah. And so we're walking to the locker room, and all of a sudden I get hit in the back and I go flying. And I look up and I see these two guys, and they're looking down and laughing. And I turn and my friends are around me and I say, what happened? I said, the one of them kicked you in the back, like I don't know, flying kick, whatever. It was a kick in the back. I said, no, no. And I went to the gym teacher. The other kids, I said, you, and they came with me, but they were all afraid that these kids were going to beat them up.
Hmm.
And I went to the gym teacher and said, this is what happened. Here are my witnesses. And we got dressed. We went to the um, vice principal's office and explained it. And gym teacher was there. They explained, I explained what I experienced. They explained what they saw. And those kids got talked to. And the next gym class, I was in the locker room, standing there, just just a towel wrapped around me, and these two guys come up to me,
Hmm.
the one who kicked me and the other big one, and they apologized. They apologized,
Okay.
asked to shake my hand, said it would never happen again, and they were very sorry. So, um, I had, and everybody was watching, so there were plenty of witnesses, right?
Yeah.
And um, the I think there were a couple of things there. There was a responsible authority
Hmm.
who took action, but there were also the community of my friends who stood by me. And I think I didn't have to, and there was no way I was going to be able to beat up these
Right.
guys who should have already been in high school. With, as far as I was concerned, they looked like high school kids. Um, so I think that, yeah, I agree with you. I think community, and I also think a responsible authorities.
Well, there's certainly something to be
But when the
said.
responsible authorities are the bullies, then it's a problem.
Right. Yes, certainly. Porky's comes to mind.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
classic cinema for those of you who are old enough to have ever seen it. But
Classic. Depends on your
um,
definition of classic, I suppose.
yeah, well, it's certainly filled with tropes.
Yes. Yeah.
Classic in that sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Classic in the way like Silverado is a classic
Uh,
in that it just explores all the tropes.
Great movie. Great
Yeah.
movie. It is a great movie.
Um, and since if we're sharing locker room bully stories, the uh, I got a someone decided he was a little bigger than me. I mean, if it came down to a fight, what I had learned because we moved every 4 or 5 years when I was a kid, and you had to start over again. You had to develop a
Yeah.
community, and until you had a community, you're on your own. And what I had to learn, what I did learn, was that in some ways you have to you have to be scary enough that they'll stop bothering you before the authorities are involved.
Yeah.
You have to be scary enough, and it's not. I had to convince bullies. I'll share the locker room story where a guy was snapping me with a towel. It was just like it became his thing. He'd snap me with the towel, and he'd raise welts on me, and I would say, "Stop it, quit it, stop it, quit it," and that was the joke, right?
Mhm.
And some people would laugh, some people would just turn away, some people didn't want to get snapped themselves, whatever. And that happened like 3 times. And I said, I asked you to stop it. Now I'm telling you to stop it. And he laughed and he tried to snap me again. Okay, all right. And I left the situation, but I went and I took my towel and I walked in through the shower and I turned the shower and I soaked my towel down. I wrapped it into a rope, doubled it up, and I soaked it. I stepped out of the shower, went around to where his sock was, and his back was to me, and I swung it as hard as I could. I hit him right upside the head from behind. He banged his head off the locker, fell over the bench, and landed on the tile. And I stood over him with it, and I said, "It's not going to be a fair fight. It's not, ever."
I find that
And
very
he was okay.
satisfying. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was okay, okay, okay. Because I would have just beaten him with that because that was heavy. That was like 5 pounds of wet towel.
Yeah.
And this isn't snapping. This isn't ha ha hee hee snap snap ha ha. No, no. I'm going to if I necessary, I was going to beat him unconscious. And I had decided that in my head
Yeah.
that he was going to beg me to stop. And I've only had to do that 3 times in my whole life. Make someone beg me to stop. But then I knew I was done.
Yeah. Yeah. I probably forestalled bullying from others
Well,
because word like that gets around.
and I never had a problem with that person. I never had a problem with any of his friends, and most of my friends didn't have any problems. When
Yeah.
you finally build that little community,
Yeah.
you know.
I was in a store and just shopping for something, and there was a man and his I think teenage son, and the teenage son you could see was just bored, and he was wandering around aimlessly, and but he was like back and forth, kind of blocking the aisle, taking up all the space. And so I needed to get past. So I said, "Excuse me," and I walked past. And as I walked past, I hear him say, "Yeah, excuse you." And I turned around and I looked at him and I did the Kubrick stare. You
Yeah,
talked
right.
about lowering the like
Yeah.
this. And I looked at him and I leaned forward without the glasses, leaned forward and looked at him and he ducked behind his father.
Hmm.
And as he stuck his head out to look at me, I stuck my finger up and I went, and he hid behind his father and he looked the other way and he went, and it's like, really, kid? You know, I mean, that was effortless,
Yeah,
but
right. Right. And you were in no real danger,
oh
certainly.
no, no, no. Eyes, nose, throat, groin, knees.
Okay. That's the order you were taught.
Yeah, yeah. Well, those are the major
Huh.
areas to those are the major fight ending areas. But the highest level of martial skill is to be able to stop the attack without injuring the other person.
Yes.
Um, I don't know that I always have that level of skill, so I might
No, well,
read.
yeah, but part of the skill is convincing your opponent that you have the skill.
Yes, to end the fight, but there are joint locks and takedowns and all sorts of things that can end the fight without having to injure somebody. Um, although you can apply those in ways that can cause injury if the need is there. But we've talked about
Right.
self-defense at
Right.
length
Well, even Sun
at
Tzu
other
says
times.
that the greatest warrior never has to fight.
Yeah.
You got to establish a certain amount of reputation, I would think. But I mean,
Mostly I find, and this is something that if you look at um if you look at travel guides, traveling to other countries, even to big cities, any big cities that have pickpockets or crime, they tell you don't walk with purpose, walk with
mhm.
intention, look like you know where you're going, and look like you are aware of your surroundings. Don't walk around with your head in your phone and your earbuds in, and you don't know what's going on, and your bag is, you're not paying attention to stuff, and be aware of your surroundings, walk with intention. Um, the fact that when we travel, I travel with a cane because no one would want to deprive an old man of his walking stick, to quote Gandalf, um, which actually got us uh, escorted to the head of the line at customs and immigration once, which was very nice. Um, and but yeah, if you don't look like you're an easy victim, you are less likely to be.
Yeah, it's victim shifting, really. It's
Yeah.
like, look,
Yeah.
the next guy's probably easier mark than me. You should wait,
Yeah.
is the philosophy there.
There's a scene in Reacher, the TV series Reacher, which I'm really enjoying, uh,
hmm
where he and he sits down at a bus stop next to a kid
Oh yeah.
and says to the kid, uh, who's eyeing somebody, he said, "Don't do it." Said, "Don't do what." It's I know you didn't you're on the bus stop, you have quarters to get exact change because you don't want to use a card. But you're a kid, nobody kid carries quarters around.
A
You
pro would have a bus pass.
Yeah, and you didn't pick anyone who got on the bus, so you're waiting for the next people at the bus stop, and you want to do a snatch and grab, and then blah blah, and you went on, and the kid is says, "What are you, a cop?" He said, um, "Doesn't take a doesn't take a cop to see an amateur. Pro would be
Yeah.
better." Says, "You need
Yeah.
money? Here's $20. Don't let me catch you doing it again. So the next person catches you doing it won't be so understanding."
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
authority figure talking sense to the kid. You know,
There's a while we were talking about community too. There's another a sort of like in the Mean Girls sort of trope of bullying. It's not it's not so much the physical threat, the
hmm
personal physical threat. Sometimes you can bully from a position of privilege where
right.
you have the community behind you. You know, you belong to some majority and you're just the spokesperson for it, and you're using that to be a bully.
Yeah,
Um, is another more in some ways more insidious because it's harder to fight that,
yeah,
right? I mean, what do you do when you're, and that's kind of why the mob thing kind of works, where you put me in jail, I've got a dozen guys who will come here and make you pay for it.
yeah,
So that's the another kind of bullying that's at least as reprehensible, where I'm not strong enough to back it up myself, but I've got all of these people who agree with me. So I'm going to say whatever I want to say, and I'm going to make you feel badly about not belonging to my group. And, also evil.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I think there's something else I want to mention, explore a little bit. And I think there is a phenomenon that and this may sound terrible, but I feel it needs to be at least mentioned. A kind of a reverse bullying, where it's coming out as a victim and gathering support as a victim and saying, "You're a terrible person. You did this to me." That happens too.
Yes, but if it is true,
Oh,
you
certainly.
know,
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm
it's
not
it's
saying that.
not a reverse bullying if it's true.
Well, or it can be aimed at someone who um, there's no personal relationship to. I'm just using my position as a victim to say anybody who's like this is terrible because.
Well, I think that certainly there are people who join causes and
Mhm.
adopt causes without fully understanding them. And when questioned about the specifics of the cause they're supporting, they can't answer. They don't know. They're it's a bandwagon thing. Oh, all my friends are, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon and bandwagon effect. So,
Sure.
and then whatever their cause is, you know, so I mean, one of the things that we try to do to put the virtues into action is truth. What is true and what can be
Yeah.
verified and what is, and it's often nuanced and there's often detail in it.
Oh,
And there's
sure,
often
certainly.
so many people want the reductio ad absurdum, the simplification until the thing is no longer resembles what it really is.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not about
or
the thing anymore. It's about this other thing.
yeah, and I mean, I could cite a number of examples, but if you would rather we avoid politics, but
Well,
it's often the case. I think what you're talking about is the the person who's guilty of something accusing other people of what they're guilty of
well,
is a
that's certainly an
variation of what you're talking about. I think what you're talking about. Well, we've certainly seen that in um, internet rumors that go around, and people then pile on to somebody who didn't actually do what they're accused of in the public sphere.
well there's a whole I think our curated feeds and the clips that we see in body cams, and I think that there's a lot of editing of circumstance,
Yeah,
and I try to be mindful of it. I don't want to say, I don't want to be this like, oh, that was terrible, that person needs to lose their job or whatever, because you only see what the person who posted it wants you to see.
yeah.
And
Get the whole story before you make up your mind.
right. And I don't
Before
think
you
it's
reach a conclusion based on evidence, it's important to have all the evidence. And that can be really difficult.
right. And I think that it behooves us, if honesty is part of our philosophy here, is, well, what happened right before they started filming? What happened right before this clip? What led to that? And there, I don't think that's an unfair question to ask, but I occasionally, or when I've bothered to ask, well, what happened before? You're victim blaming. No,
No,
I'm looking for
no.
context. That's
The
all.
yeah, the Washington Post ran a commercial um several years ago before the Bezos era,
Mhm.
um where it showed a video from one angle, and it looks like this um this guy, young man, is running after a person and running at them
Oh,
as if
right,
to
right,
very aggressively. And then you see it from another angle, and you see there was something about to fall, and they were getting to them to get them to safety and get them
right,
out of the way.
right.
And then
Sure.
it ends with their what was their tagline: "Democracy dies in darkness," and about bringing the whole truth to light. And I think that's really important, particularly because the Washington Post, Bezos, who owns Amazon, also has said now the Post will only be concerned with writing about business and defending democracy.
Whatever Bezos decides that means.
Exactly. So yeah. So actually I follow the Contrarian,
Hmm.
which is a Substack on Substack. I recommend it. Former Washington Post and New York Times staffers
Oh.
who
Hmm.
post news and write about it. And they, they were joined by a lot of others, and they quickly gained a rather large following. And I think they're really good, well
The
researched, substantiated. They do a live coffee with the Contrarian in some
okay.
mornings a week, but their Substack articles are good.
So and it's not there's lots of news feeds now coming out as this is just the facts, and you get, yeah, you get a fact, you get, here's a sentence of here's what happened. Congress did this. Congress passed this bill. And there might be a bullet point or two about what's contained in there, but there's no context.
Text, exactly. So it's, yeah, those I've l- looked at those and I find most of those lacking. And I think I mentioned this before when I was teaching in the classroom, I'd ask students where they get their news. And
Right.
for almost all of them, it was social media. I said, so do you fact check? Do you, well, other people on social media or my friends or something. So then they would ask, well, what do you do? I said, well, I review several papers online and I've got about a dozen news apps on my phone, six
Hmm.
of which I regularly check. And if I see an article covering something in one, I check it against two others, and I showed them the media bias chart that shows where
Yeah.
those are. I said, and here are ones I have all across the spectrum because I want to see how this is being reported. Um, so I think that's important to understand and not just what happened, but the context behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Um,
but I got I someone who I like and respect. I got I got a lot of blowback with this had to do with the I think it was Idaho, where those women spoke up in a town hall meeting. Was spoke out of turn by her own admission,
mhm.
speaking out of turn. And this came out after when they interviewed her. But she was the clip only starts with this woman sitting in her seat and a guy standing not in a uniform, just some dude in a cap and a golf shirt standing above her. And he's got his holding her by the wrist and he's trying to pull her out of her chair. Or he doesn't even start with that. He's asking her to leave. We're asking you to leave. He's being polite but insistent.
Mhm.
And she's, well, who are you? Who are you? And she's right to ask because he's not wearing a uniform. He's not marked as security or police or anything. There's a whole backstory. These are private security people hired by the Republican Party that's holding the town hall. So it's bad decisions are made all through this whole thing. But the thing is, this is terrible. This is terrible. And I thought, well, she's not okay. So this is a First Amendment thing. I thought, there it looks like, or at least it's being presented like she's being thrown out because the organizers of the town hall don't like the questions she's asking. But for me, looking at it, it's like, well, she's not standing behind a podium asking her questions of the panel. She's not been recognized. Is she just sitting in her chair shouting stuff? Is she just being disruptive? And I just want what actually happened before, what caused this guy to come over and ask her to leave?
I think it's important to understand the full context. But the full context is not just was she speaking out of turn, rather than just they didn't like the questions.
Well, of
It
course.
was, were they only taking questions, friendly questions? Were they only not fully
Yes.
answering? Were they dodging questions? And for a full context, think about how the Tea Party, faux grassroots Tea Party, heavily funded movement were completely disrupting town halls held by
Oh, yeah.
Democrats, shouting, not even letting, not, and there was not mass clearing. There were not, um, those people weren't cleared by force or taken away. So
No,
that the second incident cannot be viewed without understanding the first incident as well as it's not. So the context is not simply the larger context of the single incident you're describing, but the historical context as well.
Granted, um, but one does not excuse the other, certainly.
I'm not
The
saying it
fact that
does.
I
Yeah.
don't think so. The fact that it was that Republicans did it doesn't mean it was okay, and it shouldn't be okay now. But that all I was looking at was what's happening here, and what I was given back was no woman should be treated like that. That's the patriarchy telling a woman to sit down and shut up. And I went, I didn't I didn't know it was a patriarchy thing. I just thought it was a First Amendment thing. And it didn't even occur to me that they were throwing her out because she was a woman.
Yeah,
That didn't even,
they would have done it. They would have done it to anybody, I think.
well,
But they're
I
more
would think
like
so.
sometimes more likely to do it. They, you know,
But this was kind of my point was that, or what I was getting to was I wanted, all I wanted was some context.
okay.
I'm absolutely, if this person had tough questions to ask and wasn't being allowed to ask them, then absolutely she should have been. Were these guys, these ununiformed uh, guys acting like a goon squad? Absolutely they were. And somebody ought to investigate it,
Mm,
certainly. But we weren't given that in the clip. And yet,
right.
so many people were willing to jump on and say, this is horrible, this is terrible, this should never happen in this country. Like, you don't even know what's happening. How can you possibly
Well,
say it shouldn't happen in this country?
let me go back to the Tea Party mobs at
Uh-huh.
town halls. Can a group be a bully? You
Oh,
mentioned
absolutely.
the group, you mentioned the person like Mean Girls, a person with a group behind them being a bully. In that case, I think the group of those
Yeah. Right. Now
people
and
were
that's what I said. They're just a spokesperson.
right. And I think that we see that now in certain we see that now a lot where and it's often the people who are doing the mob bullying talking about dialogue when they're
Yeah.
not permitting it.
Right.
So, um,
And I certainly understand the a majority, or at least a privileged, ensconced institution saying, you need to calm down and follow the rules and approach us in a respectful manner. That's the first thing you do. And when that's ignored and doesn't work, then you have to do something else.
yes,
I
because
absolutely get that part of it.
respect goes both ways. And
Right.
um, and sometimes that institution is actually enabling the bully mob
Oh,
as
absolutely.
well.
Sure. Of
And
course.
so if that's happening, that it's a challenge. We've gone from talking about, the individual bullying and the individual response, the individual bullying and the community response, the community bullying or group bullying of individuals and of other groups, the institution bullying and supporting, but
Yeah.
it's so and the mob and governments and
And
it's
all of it
yeah,
relates, going back to the very beginning of the what we talked about. It always goes back to a power dynamic, right?
yes, yeah,
And and what I was talking about with the reverse bullying, what I was going to get to was, an, uh, I suspect you have encountered this, uh, where, and in our organization we have I think an ill-formed and um, uh, too, I'm not sure how to, it's ill-formed. We have a bullying policy, but the bullying policy is basically saying if you feel bullied, you've been bullied. And I've had occasion to where, because of my rank, whatever that
yeah,
means, it certainly does not, and as you well know, it certainly does not actually afford me privilege
No,
or
it gives you a larger voice,
it may.
some
It's
possible influence, maybe.
possible influence, but in a situation where it's me and another individual, and I'm the first to admit that I have a strong personality, and I am absolutely willing to assert my rights and question what I think is a ridiculous rule or circumstance. Okay, I'm totally upfront with that. You know me as well,
Yeah.
right? But because of my
But I've
perceived
only known you for like 45 years.
yeah, I mean, most of my adult life, but so me simply questioning why should anybody have to follow that rule to someone who perceives themselves as of a lower rank, they are bullied. They've been bullied in their mind and within the rules that are set up. I just bullied them because of the perceived power difference, even though I don't really have any power.
Right. It certainly is perceived the levels of recognition and rank in the organization lead to a perception of a power dynamic. I think it's possible it's a conundrum of the organization because as a medieval reenactment group, there's a hierarchy because medieval society was stratified. But the levels of that society, not all of them, but many of them are accessible to people based on their individual effort and hard work and so on. Not universally, but largely. Um, the the it's possible that offering help or instruction or correction to someone could be perceived as as abusive, could be perceived as bullying.
Yes,
I see what you're doing here. Can I offer you some suggestions? Oh, you're telling me what to do. You're bullying me. It could be perceived that way. Um, I am very careful about how I do that sort of thing. I certainly recognize in the classroom as the instructor with
hmm
students, and I I decide what their grades are, right? Although I tell them at the beginning, I say, I do not teach weed out classes as they used to. I'm not trying to
hmm
fail everybody. If everybody in here succeeds, if everybody gets an A, that's great. That will make me happy. I'm absolutely thrilled by that. I will do everything I can to help you succeed in this class. But I can't do the work for you. But
right.
I will help you. I tell them that. So, then and in I said I challenge me. Tell me why that you disagree. I invite them to do so. Said, have good reasons for it. Back up what you're saying. It's like
Well,
the the scientist and the priest and the uh,
oh,
I want to have a discussion. The scientist says, if you can present me, and I'm, it's a story. I'm not saying that science and religion are absolutely opposed, but it's a traditional setup of a story.
right,
The
right,
scientist says, if you can present evidence that conclusively proves what you're saying, I will change my conclusion. And the priest, and so he says to the priest, if I present evidence that conclusively proves what I'm saying, will you change your conclusion? The priest says no. And the scientist says, then we have nothing to talk about.
right. What's the
I
point?
have, and again, I don't mean to say priests and science, religion and science are absolutely inimical because they're not. I think there's how things happen and why things happen. That's another discussion. But I've used that with people. I've said, look, if we're going to have a discussion, we first have to agree on what credible evidence is and the
Yeah.
difference between a conclusion and an opinion. Um, I have a right to my opinion. Yeah, you have a right to your opinion, but not to your own facts, and your conclusion, if not based on facts, is bullshit. And so
Right.
we have to agree to things, otherwise it's playing pigeon chess, you
Yeah.
know.
Right. And I don't have to respect your opinion. I
Yeah.
have to respect your right to hold it. But if you don't hold it, if you hold it in the face of credible evidence to the contrary, I certainly don't have to respect that opinion.
No, and it's an opinion, not a conclusion.
Right.
It's simply based on truthiness, on what you feel.
Right.
Truthiness, the term coined by Stephen Colbert in the very first episode of his Colbert Show, where he
Hmm.
played a faux right-wing pundit. And his word of the day was truthiness. So describes how so many people operate. If it feels true, it's true. Well, no, that's not what it is. So I think that if the definition of if you feel bullied, you're bullied, if it's only based on feeling, um, rather than pointing to actions, specific actions, these
Hmm.
are the actions that were taken that are bullying actions. It should define the actions, not the feelings of the person. Bullied person should be able to point to actions. I think, though, one of the things we can do, and you said, I saw, I'm really explaining carefully how I present things, what I say, all in a way to address how someone might feel. So, because unless you get their concern and their fear and their trepidation and their anxiety and all of that, unless you can calm that, you can't have a conversation. And so to be able so I think that there's a lot that we can do in communicating to minimize the potential for how somebody could erroneously feel like they're being bullied. But I think that pointing to evidence, we talk about evidence and facts a lot because truth is not just, I'm not negating how people feel, but what you can point to as evidence is important.
Well, yeah. And since no one can control how you feel, they can affect how you feel, but since no one can control how you feel, other people can't be held responsible for your feelings. I mean, that's just,
We are responsible for our own feelings.
yes.
Yeah.
Now, if you felt threatened, that's something.
Yes.
But again, but it's about actions, right? I can't help that you felt threatened if I didn't do anything in my mind that was
Well,
threatening.
if you felt threatened, you should be able to point to the actions that led to you feeling threatened.
Right.
Aggressive words, aggressive body language, we've talked a little bit about precursors of attack.
Sure.
How physical, there there's body language, but there's also physical words, and physical, in addition to the physical, there's also language. There's a lot of things, but if you felt threatened, why did you feel threatened? Show me, explain to me. I'm not negating how you feel. You have the right to feel how you feel, but what are you basing that on?
Right. And that's kind of my problem, I think, with the policies as I've read it. And maybe it has been adapted or changed or reworded a little bit. But when
Yeah.
I read it, it was very much a Jacques kind of a thing. Like you are guilty until proven innocent because this person felt bullied. they've been bullied, and you need to demonstrate how you didn't actually bully them. And it's, ooh, that's really not the way we have done things in this country up till now.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but I mean, it's things uh, like I said, asserting my own rights in a situation where somebody has presented me with a rule or a procedure or a here's what you need to do. You need to do this. And I just, why would anybody do that? In just sort of that tone of voice. But some people's like, just because I look them right straight in the eyes and I don't back off, suddenly that's a threat. And I'm like, well, I can't help that you feel threatened by that. If you've never encountered a direct question in your life, I, I can't, I
Well,
can't really do anything about that.
I certainly have. I've had to explain. I've had to teach students, coworkers too, that I have strong ideas. I I
You've
come
thought about,
to. I've thought about them. I've worked through them. I come to a collaborative situation with strong ideas. I will present them strongly. I will present them with reasons and justification. I expect you to push back just as strongly because I
hmm
want you to. I want to find the flaws in it that I didn't see.
right,
Just because I push it back, push for ideas strongly doesn't mean that my ego is tied to them or it has to be my way. No, that's immature. That's silly. Let's
right.
have a vigorous discussion where we're all coming up with something better than any one of us could have come up with by ourselves. Yeah, and uh, explaining to that to students these days, especially where I mentioned this before, they will not critique each other. They won't offer any negative comments. They won't, nothing, not even the simplest thing. It's great. You worked so hard. It's really good. Or they won't say anything.
Sure.
You're not helping each other if you're not helping each other by to be better. You have insights into this. Say them. You will be expected to, in a professional situation, be expected to point out the flaws so that work can be better, things can be better. Um,
And
so
but like you say, in a critique situation, you you need to present your critique as evidence. As
yes,
you can't say, that's shitty. That's
yeah,
that's not critiquing. You can say, if your goal was to do this, you failed, I think, because of what
yes,
your decision you made here, right here. I think that failed somewhat, right? Because usually a critique is followed by a presentation, right? The artist or you know whoever's being critiqued, in my
no,
experience, usually
it follows a presentation.
exactly. That's what
Yeah,
I'm saying. The
follow. No, you
critique
said it
does.
was followed by a presentation. Follows the critique follows the presentation.
Yes. Isn't that what I
That's
said?
no, that's not what you
Oh,
said.
sorry.
You
That's
said
no, the presenter, the artist, whatever, shows their work and explains what they were trying to do,
yeah,
typically, right? And then so then that now you have a basis for the critique. Like,
yeah.
oh,
It's the what's the objective? Focus on
yeah,
the objective. And I've told I've practiced this professionally. I've told this to students. I've told this to colleagues. You always present work in terms of the objective. You get agreement on the objectives. And once you have agreement on the objectives, then the work is created to achieve those objectives. So you present it as a means to achieve those objectives. You never ask, do you like it? It's always,
right.
does it work or doesn't it work? And it works because of this, and it doesn't work because of this. Then we can address that, but we have already agreed on the objectives.
And that's true of collaboration too.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. We've all agreed on what the goal is,
Yeah.
and the collaboration is You present something that you think will achieve that goal, and another person presents a fault in that thing. It's like, oh, well, what can we do to adjust it? Somebody else offers an adjustment so that it does meet the goal, or that that fault is closed or minimized, right?
Right.
That's how collaboration works.
Yep.
But you at some point you've got to be willing to let go of the idea that your the gem that you have crafted carefully in your mind
Yes.
isn't perfect.
And that's ego. And
Yeah,
ego,
absolutely.
I think ego and so there's a difference um between letting go of ego and having no sense of self-worth. Ego and self-worth are not the same thing,
Right.
right?
Well, and
And
and this goes to humility. Let's bring
yes,
a throw up another virtue here.
yes.
Well,
So letting go of your ego is a path to growth and learning. Um, because you can let go of that and still have a sense of self-worth and still have conviction in your ideas.
sure.
But you are open to input, learning, and growth. Well, we've gone far afield, I think.
Well, uh,
Not too far afield. I mean, it's all related, tying it
right.
all together.
I mean,
Um,
I could have brought up I've seen bullies in critiques too,
oh yeah, yeah,
where the whole, haha, see how I brought that back around.
yes,
Where it doesn't matter what your idea is, it's terrible.
yeah,
And the only way, but a lot of this has to do, we talked about this kind of personality before too, where no, it's horrible. This is a crisis, but I have the solution.
yes. Someone who creates a problem, creates disruption in order to position themselves as the hero, the rescuer, who comes
Hmm.
in with the solution.
Right.
Is That's that's a form of bullying a group, an individual bullying a group. When the it's Popper's Karl Popper's um um what do you call it, the fallacy of hang on a second, talk amongst yourselves. um
Well, I was going to say that there's a,
Paradox of tolerance, the
oh,
paradox of
oh, yes, of
tolerance,
course.
that if a tolerant society tolerates intolerance, intolerance will take over.
Will
And
eventually, right. Yeah.
so a tolerant society cannot tolerate intolerance. And um, it's similar in that way, that a group with a dynamic of consensus and listening to everybody will let the disruptor speak, and it can throw a wrench in everything. And then the disruptor will come in and say, well, I have the solution. And that's an
Right.
ego-driven bullying of a group
And
that's a tolerant group.
we've certainly seen examples of someone withholding consensus,
Yes.
maliciously withholding consensus.
Yes. But that was also based on the misconception of consensus as unanimity.
Well, it was presented as not as a, not absolute agreement, but the consensus is that, okay, everyone at some point has to agree to say, all right, I'm willing to let this go. I don't agree, but I'm willing to abide by the group's decision.
Yeah, that's a kind of unanimity, I think,
Kind of.
and effectively unanimity, saying you have to vote yes or present. You can't vote no, but you vote yes or present is a kind of unanimity. And I think that was the flaw in that group dynamic that
Hmm.
allowed the people to withhold consensus maliciously or egotistically.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and it is a form of bullying. Bullying, you're absolutely right. It's certainly putting your ego before the good of the group, or at least the cohesion of the group.
Yeah.
You can stand, I mean, there's the whole, you need to stand on your principles no matter who's against you. But you also have to be willing to examine your principles and recognize when they're not serving the greater good.
Right. Okay.
Oh, you agree? Oh, awesome.
I'm willing to let it go.
Oh, we were so
Um,
close to unanimity.
yeah. Um, I think we have now come full circle.
Okay,
So
I would agree.
yeah. Um, so if you have experienced bullying, reach out to people, reach out to your community, reach out to authorities where you can, and get help.
And if
Uh,
you're a bully, stop it.
yeah. Um, and please like and share. Give us your comments and topics you'd like to see us discuss. And until we see you next time, be thou
A good night
and true.